A bit left, a bit like the golden shock.
Right. Okay, go on. You want another one?
Okay.
Right. Well, is everyone back now? You all watered and fed and everything? I hope so. Thanks to everyone who's purchased a copy of Evan's Land. They've all gone now, so that's really helped me out. Especially since I don't have to carry any home now. It's not easy transporting these things when you just got you on foot and you're using the coach. Now, we were talking earlier about this impending disaster which Richard Heinberg talks about in his book, and I must say actually Richard Heinberg is one of the more rational and more moderate people within this discussion, and I'll say more about that in a minute. But there is, I think some of the ideas he's come out with are quite dangerous, and I'm going to, this looks very grim what I've been talking about, but I'm going to reveal why I don't agree with him and why there is hope. In fact, there's more than hope. I think all this is preventable. But let's go into some of these solutions that are mainstream in our society and how they've been suggested. And one of those is nuclear power. Now, nuclear power has changed its the way people see it in the last few years. That is, there are some people within the environmental movement now who are now pro-nuclear power, which is quite remarkable when you consider how years ago, the stickers "nuclear power, no thanks" were on the back of every Dormobile and every 2CV and Volkswagen Beetle and all the other kind of cliche cars these people drive. It was nuclear power, no thanks. It was all, but and of course disasters like Fukushima have illustrated one of the disadvantages of nuclear power. Now, some environmentalists, like there's a man called Mark Linus, who is a man who lives in Oxford actually. He's an environmental campaigner. He's now pro-nuclear power, and he's split off from the Green Party and all these other people who are still anti-nuclear power. There's another one, George Monbiot, who's a bit better known than Mark Linus and is slightly more cheerful. And well, Mark Linus is a miserable git, he really is. Or as Alex Jones calls him, Lord Monbiot. That spindly little twit, not a man but a monster. You've got to see that, it's hilarious, that rant. His George Monbiot rant is hilarious. But nuclear fission power, now the advantages are it doesn't release gases and noxious chemicals into the air, and for the people who believe in carbon dioxide produced climate change, its appeal is that it is carbon neutral. George Monbiot and Mark Linus support nuclear power primarily for that fact. The disadvantages, you only have to go and look at Fukushima and you can see it, or Chernobyl in Ukraine, the disaster caused by the nuclear accidents in those places. There's wind scale here in Britain, there's 3 Mile Island in the United States. When something goes wrong with these things, it really goes wrong. The industry will say it's safe, they have all these safeguards, but disasters happen. Disasters have happened at sea, like in submarine K-19, for example, which killed nearly all of its crew over a period of a few years. Those that didn't die in the initial accident died of cancer later on. But that is nuclear, that's a particular kind of nuclear power. It's nuclear fission power. Nuclear fission has been around for, it's been around since the middle of the 20th century now. Basically what happens is they take materials such as materials like uranium. These are heavy metals. They split the atoms, and the atoms fly apart, and they split other atoms, and those atoms fly apart, etc. You get a chain reaction, and that releases the energy. The dangers of that is the ionizing radiation caused by that process, of course, and the toxic waste. Once this nuclear fuel is spent, it creates something called plutonium, which is the most poisonous substance known to man. It can be used in nuclear weapons as well. If it's stolen, it can be used to make illicit nuclear weapons. If you believe there are such things as legitimate, non-illicit nuclear weapons, but basically they're very, very dangerous and they're poison. And these have to be buried underground in vaults, where they will have to be there for over 300,000 years before they're safe. And basically there's a finite amount. You can only bury so much of this toxic stuff underground before it becomes a major environmental hazard, not just for us but for future generations. Next slide please. But there's other forms of nuclear power as well, and one of those is nuclear fusion power. Now I'm very lucky in Oxford because I live just a few miles away from one of the primary world centres for nuclear fusion research. This is the Culham Centre for Fusion Energy and their joint European Torus. This is a photograph taken inside the jet reactor, basically. It's called a tokamak, and it's a nuclear power plant. It's a nuclear power plant, but it's very, very different to the nuclear fission power plant. Firstly, it runs off fusion instead of fission. What happens is, instead of splitting atoms apart, it fuses them together, and this releases even more energy. It's even more compact than nuclear fission. Nuclear fission power is about 1,000 times as compact as coal and oil. So this is about 1,000 times as compact as nuclear fission. So it's 1,000,000 times as compact as coal and oil. As you see here, this is a picture on the left. You see a little cutaway. That's it in operation. That basically is fusing gas. It fuses at enormously high temperatures, millions of degrees. That's a problem. There's a lot of engineering obstacles to overcome to make this work, because you need to get the gas, which is fusing, at a very, very high temperature, millions of degrees, like I said. There's a new production plant being built in France now called ITER, I-T-E-R, and that's going to take a while to build. The fuel is, instead of heavy metals and things like that, for instance, uranium, I should have pointed out in the previous slide, uranium is going to run out before oil. There's only about 25 years left of uranium in the ground, which is another reason not to support nuclear fission power. We passed peak uranium a long time ago, and now it's on decline. Deuterium is the fuel for nuclear fusion. Deuterium is extremely common. It's one of the most common substances in the world. It's found in water, just plain water. You can run this thing off water. But because of the engineering obstacles that are going to overcome, it's a long, long time before we're going to get power stations, commercial power stations, fueled off this stuff. ITER won't come online for at least another 10 years. It's still being built right now. I've been following it on YouTube, the building of ITER in France. That's an experimental power plant. Once that's proven to work, they'll have to build a demonstration power plant, a demonstration power station separate from ITER. That will be connected to the grid, and then it's only after that they'll start building other power stations at other places, and we'll have commercial nuclear fusion power. We're talking probably the end of the century when they finally get around to it. Next slide, please. So there's a comedian called Robert Newman who's quite funny, even though I disagree with him, like the way I disagree with Robert Heinberg. But he's quite funny because he dresses up as the devil and he goes, "There's no way out." He's got this comedy show called The History of Oil, which is very, very funny, and that's kind of how we feel right now. That's kind of what it's like right now. This is the graph I was talking about earlier. This is Heinberg's graph. This is the pessimistic doomsday prediction for the future based on his work and many others. As we see here, population has continued to rise to a certain level. It keeps going up and up and up. Resources shrink to nothing. In other words, that's the sugar gone in the yeast, in the brewer. And then environmental destruction reaches a point where it is irreparable and complete. At that point, energy production drops, of course, because the resources to create energy are gone, and most chillingly of all, population drops. Like the yeast in Heinberg's analogy, we all die. And in this scenario, there would be untold, it would be a disaster unimaginable. We'd have 7.5, maybe more billion people on the earth who suddenly have no supply of energy. To have no supply of energy doesn't mean you just don't have you can't switch your lights on. It means you don't have any food, because our food supply, our farms, is dependent on energy. It's dependent on energy, as I explained earlier, because we now use tractors to pull ploughs instead of mules. Also, we use oil as needed to produce the agrochemicals. Oil is needed to fuel the lorries which drive the food to the shops so we can buy it. Because we don't have our own farms in the local area anymore. Some people do, but not many. We import stuff from across the world. I saw some tomatoes in the shop the other day that came from Zimbabwe. Tomatoes. You get tomatoes here. Even in Wales, you grow them in your greenhouse. Why are you bringing them from Zimbabwe? Why don't the Zimbabweans eat their tomatoes and we eat ours? But no, they're brought in from abroad. That takes energy. And it's calculated that for every single calorie of food energy we consume, 7 calories of oil energy is necessary. and that has risen because you only have to go back about 50 years, and it was like it was the other way around. It was 7 food calories per 1 calorie of oil energy. Now it's reverse. Next slide, please. It goes by several names: the collapse, Armageddon, the fall is the most common words used. And Richard Heinberg talks about this in almost in a humorous way. The party's over, he says. There are other people similar who are similar to Heinberg in their views, but far more extreme. They're far more extreme. They are, for instance, there's a man in Finland called Pentti Linkola, who he's a self-confessed eco-fascist, and he believes in order to prevent something like this, he recommends the nuclear bombardment of all the major cities in the world to kill off 90% of the world's population, followed by a kind of eco-communist global regime where people are not allowed to do anything. The only transport will be allowed is bikes and things like that. He's very extreme. But there's people who are listening to this man. There's a guy in America called Soren Renner, who often does speeches about this, and he has a catchphrase which is "Billions will die, we will win," and he's very similar to Pentti Linkola. And they have this analogy. There's almost this slogan. The slogans like this they use. They say things like, "When the ship goes down, and there's 100 people in the water drowning, there's only one lifeboat. It only holds 10 people. The haters of life are those who will reach their hands out to pull the people in the water aboard, knowing that it will swamp the entire boat and cause everyone to drown. The lovers of life are those who are willing to take the ship's axe and hack at the hands on the gunnels." It's really the air of desperation is really quite funny. After doing that voice, I've got to have a drink after doing that voice. The air of desperation is really incredible. Is really, like I said, Heinberg won't go this far. But there are people calling for very extreme measures to prevent this, including as I said, the extermination of most of the people on Earth. And I think that's very important because I think there is an agenda to do that, and this is being used not as the reason but as the excuse. I will explain. But basically, the idea is, and I think this is being discussed in private now, and seen publicly, like people like Renner and like Linkola, and also Bill Gates in his own way is actually quite extreme. He's quite a radical when it comes to this sort of thing. But they're basically saying that we need, in order to prevent this from happening, we need a global authoritarian government with a completely planned economy, resource-based industry, an end to all national boundaries, an end to independent governments, a single global authoritarian planned government which will organise everything. Now, and in other words, a new world order. You've probably heard this before. A new world order is now the solution to this. It's being seen as a necessary evil, the ultimate evil, but is necessary for the evil that's beyond ultimate. If you don't support the New World Order now, you don't care about the planet, you don't care about humanity or the planet Earth. And this is really the sting in the tail, that everything that Heinberg has been talking about and all these ideas is fueling the agenda for some people acting in good faith who really believe it, to suggest a new world order to save the world. Next slide, please. I believe that some of these measures are already underway. Chemtrails. I don't know exactly what they are. I don't know exactly what they're doing. Some people say they're part of a climate change alleviation program to solar radiation management because they reflect rays back up into space. Some people say they're spreading biological material into the biosphere, across the world to genetically alter humans, animals, plants, and everything else in order to save the world from destruction. I don't know what they are. I do know they exist, and I do know they're bad news for us. There's lots of different ideas to this. I don't know what they are. Next slide, please. To genetically alter life so that it is in a new form, which will make it more suitable to a future world. This new world order is not just going to be a political change or a political and economic revolution, but it will also, the intention is for it to be a biological revolution as well, a change in what it means to be alive, for what life means. And we're eating already food which is not natural. We're eating food which is created, which is genetically changed in the laboratory. We're told it's safe, but the people who say it's safe are connected to the industry. I think they're not people we can trust. Am I recording? What am I doing? No, that's what I'm doing. Sorry, just one moment, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, I'm not recording. Oh, that's all right. Start recording now. So, that I think is all part of this. There's many other examples I could give, which I don't have time to give now, about how the world is changing. The world is being artificially changed into a new form, and lots of well-meaning people have been recruited into doing this because they believe they have to, because of the danger that's facing us. Next slide, please. As the late, great Robert Anton Wilson once said, our planet is one increasingly resembling a huge maximum security prison. The only intelligent choice is to plan a jailbreak. So don't I care about the world too? Of course I do. But the truth of the matter is, as I said at the very beginning when I showed you a picture of Richard Heinberg, or Richard Heinberg, yeah, I don't agree with him. I don't agree with any of these people. The truth of the matter is, the ship is not sinking, it's being scuttled. And the captain is the one behind the scuttling. He's doing it so he can trick us into the water and into the lifeboat, so we can hack at hands with axes, and then the captain can take the lifeboat and run a much tighter ship on board that lifeboat with fewer people than he did on board the ship, to adapt the Renner-Linkler analogy. If we end up in that lifeboat or in the sea, then it'll, because there's no other way to put it, but the truth of the matter is, it will be because we were tricked into it. Now what we need really is a new energy source. We need an energy source which is abundant, if infinite, or at least very abundant, that is cheap, that is not environmentally friendly, and is easy to access and very, very powerful, so that it can replace oil. And so, unlike wind and solar power, it's actually practical. But there is, you see, there is this energy source. There always has been. The means to create energy exists, and it can be created out of the very fabric of the universe. Energy that's clean, completely clean, not environmentally damaging in any way. It's free, it doesn't cost anything. It's very simple to access. You don't have to pay much for it in terms of generating it, unlike fossil fuels, which cost a lot of money. And it's available in infinite amounts. The means to access this energy are, in some cases, surprisingly simple. You don't need a large hadron collider or some big power station. You can do it very simply. You could do it in your home. You could do a very, very simple piece of engineering, very basic, and it's even present in nature. It's been observed in some weather conditions, and even some animals and plants have evolved to use it. Now, scientists in the mainstream, they will call it over-unity. Over-unity, this basically is like, it's a scientific heresy, because it is taking more energy out of a system than you put in. This should be impossible. There are laws, the laws of thermodynamics, the laws of the conservation of energy, the laws of entropy, etc., which are meant to prevent this from happening. But recently we've been hearing about the zero-point energy, that physicists are saying that there is an energy field in the universe, even if you take away all the thermal energy from it, you're left with something. We're told it's not accessible, you can't tap it, you can't use it. But what if you can? I think you can. What if you can? What if there was a way of doing it? Now, you might say to me, well, Ben, this is wonderful, this new invention that's just come along. Well, you know, it's great, but it's not a new invention that's just come along. It's been around for a very, very long time. We're talking over a century now, close to a century and a half. Plans for devices like this date back before the age of oil, even when we were in the age of coal, in the Industrial Revolution. I'm going to give you a few examples, and I'm going to start with a particular case, which I'm sure will make future school children smirk in their science lessons. Because I'm going to talk to you about George A. Pigott. He was famous for levitating his balls. And don't worry, the next slide is not going to be what you think it's going to be. Next slide, please. This is George A. Pigott. In 1903, he applied for a patent because he found a way to levitate steel balls using electric current. So this is what's known as an electrogravitic effect. You may have heard of Thomas Townsend Brown and the things that he's discovered. This is similar. This is basically electrical energy is transferred into a system in which, for some reason, somehow, the gravitational field on that object is reduced, or even cancelled out, allowing it to levitate, to lift into the air, something that should be impossible. But the electrical field, the particular electrical field, prevents gravity from accessing that. So essentially, it's a perfect aircraft. It lifts up. Next slide, please. This is another example, more recent. This is from the 1990s in Tampere University, Finland. They found that they could create a ring of magnets and spin them very, very fast and hang as a weight over the top of it. You can see this is a 1 stone weight hanging over the top of it. And when this was spinning, this ring was spinning at a certain rate, that weight would lose 4.5 ounces of weight when it's hanging over this spinning magnet. That's impossible. A 1 stone weight loses 4.5 ounces. We should point out what weight is. Weight is not mass. Weight is actually an effect of gravity. It's an effect, when a mass is in a gravitational field, it puts pressure on anything beneath it. In this case, the floor, my weight on the floor, because I'm a mass in a gravitational field. That's what weight is. And this weight was reduced. That should be impossible. It could only happen if the gravitational effect, the gravitational field of the Earth, was in some way reduced around that big steel block. Next slide, please. It's not possible to discuss the evolution of alternative esoteric energy without talking about this man. This is Nikola Tesla. Now, he was born in 1856 in Serbia, and in 1884 he moved to the United States of America, where he didn't have a job, he didn't have a penny when he arrived, but he very quickly earned an income because he was a genius in terms of electricity. Even as a small child, he used to go out and he used to walk through thunderstorms watching the lightning because he was so fascinated by it. He went into business with Thomas Edison, and they later became rivals. And basically, what he discovered, the reason he'd gone into trouble was because he discovered that there is energy. Well, he was one of the people who discovered that energy to run electrical power can come out of the fabric of the universe. But also that he went public with it, he spoke out about it. It's funny about Tesla because this man really ought to be as famous as Albert Einstein. He ought to be a household name. And he has achieved success. I mean, for instance, he invented an alternating current that we use today, but also the unit of magnetic power is the Tesla. The word for the units of magnetic power is named after him. Strangely enough, though, when I was a porter at my hospital, they know about this because we have magnets at the hospital in things like the MRI scanners. And I was talking to a radiographer once, and he was boasting about his new machine that had just been delivered, this £5 million MRI scanner had just been installed in the hospital. He says, that's a 3.5T magnet, and it's one of the most powerful magnets in the world. And it's all mine, and stuff like that. And I said to him, well, what's that? What does the T stand for? He says, I don't know. We just measure magnetic fields in T's. Like a fridge magnet is a few micro T's, and you get like different magnets there. That's a milli T and things like that. And this is 3.5 T's. And the funny thing is, this guy was a trained radiographer. He must have had studied science at school to a considerable level to be allowed on the radiography training course. He didn't know what T stood for, and I'm a hospital porter, and I've got a GCSE in English, which I left school at 16. I know it stands for Tesla. So why have they shortened it to T? It's not like Tesla's a long name. It's not like he's called Teslarowski Bondarensky. If that was his name, yeah, it's shortened it to T. It's Tesla, so why don't you just 3.5 Tesla Magna? I think they want to write this guy out of history. I think they want to, even the things he has achieved in the mainstream, they want to try and eliminate. Nikola Tesla he carried out several experiments, some of which are still classified today after 120 years in some cases. Now, he said his discovery, his gift of energy, he wanted to give it to the world. That made him a lot of enemies, including people like JP Morgan and several other major power brokers, plutocrats. It's really a sad story, but they destroyed him. They brought him down. JP Morgan very famously said, if I can't put a meter on it, I don't want to use it. Nikola Tesla died in 1943, penniless, at the age of 7, I think he was 70 something, and he died, basically he was living in a hotel room and he had just enough money for his bills. Now before even the undertakers were allowed into the room to take the body away to the funeral parlour, the FBI sealed the door, went in there and confiscated all Tesla's books, his papers, everything he had. His equipment was gone, and we don't know where it went. It's still classified today. Next slide, please. There are many other examples I can talk about who have also delved into this area of research. A lot of them are not professional scientists, so they don't have a career to ruin. Because if you're a professional academic and you get into this, you're finished. People like Bruce De Palma, John Keeley, Thomas Townsend Brown, as I mentioned, who've gone into electromagnetics. This is a man who's still alive today and is still working in this field. It's John Hutchison. And he's quite well known thanks to Andrew Johnson and Dr. Judy Wood, and I'll talk more about those in a minute, because the kind of research we're talking about here can be used, I think is being used as a weapon. Come on, next slide please. It's getting windier, isn't it? The wind's getting worse. Now this guy here is he's a sport of the English Defence League, as you can see. That's Ed L, that says. Ed L stands for Edward Leedskalnin. His name is Edward Leedskalnin, and he's a very interesting chap indeed. He comes from Latvia, and in the early 20th century he moved to the United States, and he was an interesting chap because before he left Latvia, he was engaged to be married to a young lady called Agnes Scuff. That was her name, and basically it didn't work out. They had a very acrimonious breakup, and he basically never got over it. And I think because he was such an eccentric man, he dealt with it differently to how other blokes would. Most other blokes go out, they get drunk, they cry on their friend's shoulder for a couple of days, and they get on with their life. This guy didn't. This guy built a monument to his lost love. He built what's known as Coral Castle in Florida. His monument is built out of coral rock, which he built single-handedly working at night, and if you see it, it seems hard to believe that someone could actually construct something like this. What's interesting about it is that Leedskalnin was very interested in ancient Egypt,